What's up, y'all? We are headed to the nursery, me and my dad, and we're going to be refreshing the garden for the fall. So stay tuned. Say hey, Daddy.
Hey, Mama.
Look right here.
Hey, how's it going?
Herbs and stuff all over here.
You ever do the green onions?
I need to get some onions. Yeah, I had green onions last time. I need to get some green onions.
Habanero peppers. Yeah. That's nice.
Alright, so we're out looking at herbs, peppers. I think we're going to get some. If they have some green onions, I'm going to get some green onions. Everything else I'm going to start from seed because plant starts are expensive and it's so much cheaper to start them from seed. But I always like looking, and sometimes I'll pick up something just to see how it performs in comparison to my seeds. Alright, at this point we just browsing. I'm gonna go look at the fruit trees, see if they got any new kind of fruit trees, and then we're gonna come.
They were talking about the what you call the trees here.
Then we're gonna come and probably get all of the soil and stuff. You said what kind of tree?
What they were saying, some kind of tree. What did they say? Tangerine? They say some kind of tree they were getting.
Oh. Over here? Oh, okay, yeah.
They did so.
It's a lot of, it's hot. It's so hot out here. Here they go. These are the mango. No, these are pecans. That's where I got my banana tree from.
These are watermelons. These are
Guava.
Guavas. Lemons.
Tangerines.
Lemons.
These mango trees are going to get really, really tall, I think.
Never found that pineapple mango, did you?
No, I haven't found it yet. We have to go to another nursery to get it. Whew, y'all, it's hot out here. It's Florida, but we're just looking at the mango trees. My dad wants a pineapple mango tree. I don't think they have them here. But there's like hundreds of varieties of mangoes, if y'all didn't know. But anyways, we're just browsing. It's so hot. We're probably going to get this soil and compost and then head back to the house and take a breather.
Have a positive attitude about everything. It'll work out for you. Might not come when you want it. You got to do the potting soil too?
Some potting soil, yes.
And the cart's still right here. We need to get two of these, right?
Yeah, 2 of the peat moss. Alright, so I'm going to get some peat moss to aerate my soil because I'm going to do carrots and beets. I'm going to get some potting soil just to fill in some gaps, and then topping everything off with mushroom compost. Daddy, we can always go to the front. They can do it.
Oh, we can always go to the front. They can do it?
Yeah. Let's get them to
go to the front.
Go to the... It is so hot. It's hot. Anyways, I love coming here because they load stuff for you, and I really appreciate that. At the big box stores, they do not like to help load. They'll tell you they will, and then they don't be liking to. But here at your local nurseries, they'll definitely help you load your stuff. So we're loading up the mushroom compost, the peat moss, and I got a little bit of organic soil potting mix. And I love when my dad is with me because he has this big truck. It's a really big long bed truck. This was actually my grandfather's truck. He used to haul cattle in this truck, so that tells you how big the bed of the truck is. It's really big, so we can fit a lot of stuff, and instead of trying to pile it up in my little bitty car, we can fit it in the back of the truck and make one trip. And so I think we're good here. There's a place that I want to look up for some mulch. I think they have like really good mulch. I'm gonna look them up. We might go there, but it's like 1,000 degrees outside, and me and my dad are like dying in this heat. So yeah.
A few moments later.
All right, y'all, we are out here in the garden. We're getting ready to bring my dad's truck around, and we're going to be putting out peat moss, some organic potting soil mix, and also some mushroom compost out in the garden beds to refresh them for the fall. Now, I'm going to be planting a lot of carrots and beets, and as root vegetables, they need a good amount of aeration, which is why we're putting the peat moss out there. Now, I do want to recognize that peat moss is not sustainable or as sustainable as a lot of gardeners would like. So a lot of people use coconut coir. It's whatever you have available to you. I had peat moss available to me, so that's what I'm going to be using out in the garden today. I'm also going to be adding some Diatomaceous Earth just to make sure some of those pest issues that I had from the spring have subsided and I'm not worried about them as much. I'm also probably going to add a little bit of all-purpose fertilizer from True Organic just to replenish the beds and get them ready for a whole new season of growth. So stay tuned. Yeah, you just put it right in the middle. I think I might put it in there. And then, you can bring the other bed over here. The other bag right here, yeah, over here. And then peat moss is fairly light. Where I'm gonna put one in the middle and one over by these. Yeah. And then you can put it in the middle. Like here in the middle. Thank you. That's everything, right?
Yep. There's nothing. I'll move this truck over
Okay.
there.
Thank you. Alright, so now it's time to get to work. I want to give you guys a few tips when you're preparing your garden from season to season. The first thing you want to think about is, did you have pest issues in the previous season, and are those pest issues taken care of? The example that I have for you is that I had grubs in some of my garden beds. And if you're not familiar with those, definitely check out my Instagram and TikTok videos about those grubs. But I had to make sure when I moved on to the next season that I took care of that grub issue, or I could experience significant issues with my harvest for the next season. So you want to consider your pest issues. Now, you all heard me talk about using Diatomaceous Earth, and I'm using that because I did have a few different types of bugs in the previous season. So you might be wondering, what is Diatomaceous Earth? So basically, Diatomaceous Earth is the ground up fossilized remains of something called phytoplankton. And phytoplankton is a microscopic plant-like organism. So it's a really ground up, very fine powder, and basically it's scratchy, so it can pierce the exoskeleton of a lot of pests, and then they can eventually die from it. It's also known as silica. It's a good natural alternative to use for pest control in your garden. Now, you do want to do your research because Diatomaceous Earth does not cure every pest issue known to man, but it does help with some common things like ants. For instance, I had ants in some of these beds, so the Diatomaceous Earth is really good for the ant. Now, when you're using Diatomaceous Earth, I recommend that you do not use it on a windy day or a rainy day. Now, you can see me using it here in this video. It's very fine, and therefore when you pour it out of the bag, it can kind of have a dust. You want to be careful with inhaling that, especially if you have asthma or lung issues. So I would suggest just being very careful, maybe putting a mask on when you're applying it. Also, it's not recommended to use diatomaceous earth when it is raining because it doesn't work that well when it's wet. So I made sure that I put it out on a day that was dry and that we didn't have a lot of rain. That's something that you definitely want to consider. Now what we're doing here is we're mixing in peat moss, and peat moss is going to help keep your soil nice and aerated. For me, I'm doing this because I'm planting a lot of root vegetables, and I talked about that earlier. But when you're planting root vegetables, you want to make sure that your soil is nice and light and it's not compacted. The peat moss is going to add a lot of aeration to make sure that those root vegetables are able to grow and thrive. Now, you heard me mention earlier that peat moss is not sustainable. I would recommend that you do your research about it. The way that the peat moss is grown and developed, it takes thousands of years for it to grow, and therefore when we utilize it, it's not something that's going to grow back and we can continue using. This is why a lot of gardeners opt to use coconut coir. It's more sustainable because it comes from coconuts. What I had available to me was this peat moss, so I made a decision to use it. But by all means, do your research and definitely use another alternative if you're not comfortable with the peat moss. So now I want to talk about compost, and here I chose to use mushroom compost. It's very rich and it adds a lot of good nutrients to your soil. So if you do nothing else, at least add compost to the top of your bed. Now, I also like to add this mushroom compost to the top of my grow bags, as well as any other parts of my garden where I'm going to be adding new crops. Now, you don't have to use mushroom compost. You definitely can use cow manure or other aged manures. I know some people who have chickens, they'll use chicken manure. I do think you have to let that age a bit before you put it in the garden, but people use the manure from different animals. You want to make sure that you're just applying something that is going to add nutrients to your garden beds. I did also add fertilizer. It's not required, but I went ahead and added it. If you're adding a compost, you definitely don't have to add in any fertilizer type. Something else to consider when you're going from season to season is rotating your crop types. Now, you can see here I had some peppers grown in that bed that you see my dad working in right now, and I had some collard greens. So I would make sure in this next season that I plant a different type of crop that's not in the same family as peppers and brassicas, which is what collard greens are. Now, I would recommend you do some research on this as well, because plants and crops are grouped into different families based on the way that they grow and what other crops they're related to. It also is defined by the type of nutrients that it needs. So a lot of people recommend rotating your crops so that you preserve the fertility of your soil. So for instance, where you plant your brassicas, such as collard greens and cabbage, you would want to plant them in a different place the next season because they may deplete the soil of certain nutrients. So I like to rotate my crops all around these garden beds just to make sure that I'm preserving the fertility of my soil. So my final tip right now is when you're doing this, preparing your beds for the next season, you want to make sure you give the elements that you added some time to settle into the bed. So for instance, if you Google right now, you'll see that peat moss can change the pH of your soil. Research shows that after a couple of days, it pretty much balances out. But I like to make sure that I give myself a couple of days in between when I'm getting ready to move something out and plant something out. Also, because we added a good amount of things to the top of these beds, you want to water it in really good and give it time to settle, because you may need to add a little bit more on the top. You'll notice that the beds will look really full, but after a couple of days, it will settle down. So I would recommend at least waiting a week or so in between when you're adding all of these elements to your garden beds and when you're putting direct sowing seeds or putting transplants out. I'm going to be starting some seeds indoors and direct sowing, so come back later to see all of that content. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment with any questions or any tips that you may have for me. Thanks for watching.